Hi, I'm Becky Meagher and welcome to Transitions Body, Mind, Spirit. Transitions, we all go to different places in our lives. We have different transitions. I like the metaphor of something that I do, which is triathlons. First you get in the water and you swim, and then you get to the transition area, and then you get on your bicycle, and then you transition again and run. And that's just a metaphor for all the different things that happen to us in our lives and what changes, how we age, how we get back to our youthfulness. And we have an amazing person, very, very interesting person here today, Dr. Brent Davis, who is a chiropractor who has found amazing healing spirits, entities, practices through flowers, plants, herbs. And he is so interesting. We're going to make this 2 shows, so make sure that you get to see part 1, which this is, and then part 2. But welcome, Brent. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Can you give us a little idea what you call yourself now in your practice?
Right.
And then I want to kind of go back to the beginning of your life and how you transitioned from where you were born to where you are now, having a farm, doing amazing things with hemp, having a number of companies. But kind of explain, what do you feel you are today?
Hard to put a word to it. You know, I say integrative care physician with a background as a chiropractic doctor. But I have a lot of things that I have studied, and I just simply got that degree, which is very useful, and it's extremely useful to understand how the neurology and the structure of the body works, which is what we primarily focus on. A lot of people don't know that chiropractors use all the same medical texts in any medical school. We just don't function. We don't focus on drugs. We don't focus on surgery, but we have all the same basic training. Mm-hmm. So what we learn about is what is wellness. We don't study. We do have a year in pathology, and we study bacteriology, and we study all of that stuff. But the main focus of chiropractic physicians is what's wellness. You have to have a concept of, so when someone comes into me, if they are eating well, exercising properly, and taking no medication, they get the note, this person is largely well. As soon as they start taking drugs, they're not well anymore. It's very clear. If you have to rely on a drug to function, that's the definition of not being well. So it's really funny how people have forgotten what should be such a common sense thing. Mm-hmm. And they just have simply forgotten it with the barrage of the media constantly in our face.
Right, and all the prescription drugs and all that.
Yeah.
But getting back to you and your beginnings, where did you start your life?
Well, I grew up in West LA.
Los Angeles, not Lower Antioch.
That's right,
Yeah.
West Los Angeles. And I was raised pretty much in the house of my grandfather, who came and retired in California from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. You know, that was the background. My mom lived there, and the family moved out there in the late 30s, I guess. And he happened to buy a nice house in an area that's become the absolute elite property in the whole city of Los Angeles, where all the movie stars ended up eventually moving there, because it's at the base of the Santa Monica Mountains, and you don't really know that you're in a city there. It's really beautiful, but it's very close to a place called Brentwood and Pacific Palisades. It's these really high-end areas. So now it's become just you can't live there unless you're a very, very wealthy person. But that's where I grew up, and it was a privilege, because if I think of the poor kids in inner cities, I would not have made it as a human being if I had to deal with the trauma and the stress of those places. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, was there like a California factor, or you going into medicine, or give us a little more background? You went to high school, and then what happened?
Well, my mother thought I should be a surgeon.
A doctor?
A doctor.
Okay.
A real doctor. And so I went to UCLA, and that's where I had a double major, anthropology and pre-med. Took all the basic pre-medical sciences. and took longer because I was a dual major, so I was there 5 years. And I worked my way through college as a house painter, actually.
As a house painter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, painted all kinds of houses in Westwood.
Huh.
And during the course of time that I was doing that, I didn't have the normal background in anthropology because I was taking all the prescribed courses, but what I really was interested in was ethnomedicine.
Ethnomedicine?
Ethnomedicine, the study of the practice of traditional healing in different cultures.
Oh, okay.
And so, you know, I'd hang out in the research library of UCLA, and I always remember there was this wonderful collection of what's called the Peabody Museum. Actually, I just went to the Peabody Museum last summer at Harvard University, and they produced this wonderful set of ethnographic books that talked about anthropologists and sociologists, but primarily anthropologists, that went out and interviewed Native American people, Indians, Native American Indians, in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And you could read the account of these anthropologists as the Native people shared, in some cases, very profound wisdom. And in other cases, and I wrote about this in the book, in other cases, if you became familiar with the way this thing worked, you'd see that the Indians were just creating just ridiculous fantasy and telling these interviewers just total nonsense. And it was kind of funny. You'd have to figure it out, but you could tell when the Indians were playing with them. And just
So
telling
you were studying the ethnoplants.
the ethnology, yeah, the ethnographic uses of plants, the traditional systems, their social structures of North American Indians, and then then later I took a course for a whole year on Peruvian culture, and little did I know at the time that would serve me so well, because starting in 1988 I developed a true connection with Peru, and I did work there for years. I had a nonprofit foundation for 6 years that went after a tract of land, 20,000 acres in remote Peruvian jungle, and we had approval from the government. We would get that land with an outright grant if we did the forestry inventory, a very, very complex method of studying the forest, laying out grids, 100-meter grids, going all through the forest, documenting. It's very technical. It's technical forestry. And when you complete that study, if it's approved, the government says, well, you're going to take care of it, and we'll give you that land. And there were only a few places left in the whole country where they were still doing that. The areas closer to Lima were all gone. They had done that 50 years before, but then they stopped. And so we had all the paperwork completed. We had a professor from the La Molina University, one of the lead professors there, oversaw the whole thing. The documentation was given to the magistrate in this far-reaching district. A logging company found out about those papers, stole the papers, changed the names on it, was awarded that 20,000 acres. I got a call one day to tell me that. Logged that magnificent area with trees as big as, I'm trying to think, 15, 20 feet across. Cut those trees down, and then for the icing on the cake, they made an ecotourism center out of that land.
After they decimated
they left
the
a little
forest.
area where they didn't cut the trees, right on the river.
Right.
And so that was, I think I'll return to looking at another project now all these years later. That was very disheartening, but it was.
So when you were in Peru, were you studying the plants that actually were there?
Yeah, I mean, I realized I introduced in a mainstream way one of the great herbs from Peru, which is cat's claw. And my studies from 1988 to 1992 were very pivotal in getting that herb into the United States, which I'm actually very sad about, really, the way that it took. One of the things that we were going to do in that section where it grew natively, the plant grew.
Cat's claw.
Cat's claw grew natively. We're going to put it under major cultivation. Never had the chance to do that. So what's happened in the meantime is virtually all that plant's been cut down. Now people are still supplying it, but I don't really know how, because it was really denuded for a period of many years. Loads of 20, 30, 40 tons of that material were taking out. I don't even know how that happened, but anyway, so it never happened. And
so there you are in Peru,
yeah.
and your big project was taken away by the logging industry.
Taken away by what we see all around the world. just
right.
graft and corruption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you returned to the U.S. and somehow or other, and I must mention this book also. This book, which I've been reading with a couple other friends of mine, it kind of documents exactly what he is talking about. And you go through this process of learning that there are essences of flowers that are healing, and that's been a huge part. And so I'd like to know how.
Well, it went, yeah, the herbal stuff was from when I began practice. 3 years later, I started an herbal company in 1981. And that company is still in existence today, and actually we still have a few people that have been in practice that long that have used the products that long. So it's vital and vigorous. After that terrible boondoggle in 1992,
In Peru.
when I learned that this whole project, if it had gone through, I probably never would have lived in the United States.
Wow.
So it's one of those, one of those things. It's all controlled
It's
up
very
above.
pivotal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I probably would have. It would have required my full-time attention. It would have been that land would have produced $3 million a year at that time, without ever cutting a tree, just by harvesting the forest resources.
Wow.
About $3 million a
What
year
a
would
wonderful thing that could have been.
would have come out of there without ever cutting a tree. But at any rate, so when that happened, I was still living in LA, practicing in West Los Angeles, and I just felt this tremendous calling to be with nature. So I started looking for land in the southeastern United States. I didn't want cold. I didn't really want cold. I mean, Maine is a gorgeous state. I mean, there's a bunch of beautiful states in the eastern seaboard, eastern area, but I didn't want that cold. So I looked in North Carolina and West Virginia and Tennessee, and I described in the book how I got to Tennessee. Patient in Los Angeles just looked up at me and said, "I think I know where you need to be." And 10 days later, we were on a plane. And I obtained that land, and then spent several years developing it because it was raw land. It had probably never been used. It was just a piece of land that had a little house on it that had been occupied for.
And this is
years.
land that you bought in Tennessee. All right.
Yeah.
And tell us what you did with that land.
Well, it's on the edge of a Mennonite community, and part of that community moved. But before they moved, I had access to one of the greatest workforces I've ever seen in my life. These people
The Mennonites.
oh my goodness, like the Amish, but just high integrity. I've told the story. They worked for me for 4 years, and I never had to ask anyone what something was going to cost. Never. They just simply would present the bill, and I knew that no one could do the work better or less expensive. So I just simply paid the bill, and I never asked. I never had to.
Wow.
To this day, I just put in a massive fencing project. I didn't ask the guy what he was going to charge me. It doesn't matter, because they're so honest. And to be able to live like that is actually a true blessing.
Yes.
It really is.
So there you are in Tennessee. You have this plat of land. You have the Mennonites helping you farm it. And what are you doing with your ethnobiology stuff?
Well, really, that's still all of the interest in the ethnology. I went all over the United States, and a lot of our herbs come from many different parts of the United States. Many of them are wildcrafted, meaning gathered in the wild, and maybe 10 or 15 of them that grow in the woodlands here. We grow them and we use them, and then we still get a lot of wild herbs, from around the country.
Give us an example, because we're kind of vague. Like, these are some herbs that you plant, that you get, you forage for, and what do they do?
Oh, well, one of the great problems with environmental toxicity is stress on the liver. The liver is very stressed. Most of the organs in the body are stressed with all the pollutants that we have to breathe and eat. Even if we're using organic food, a lot of this stuff is still in the soil. It's coming in the rain. So it's not possible to stay really well without using some special nutritive and herbal things. So if you want to cleanse the liver, for example, there are a lot of herbs. We grow one called blessed thistle.
Blessed thistle?
Which is actually probably more valuable than milk thistle. Milk thistle is very famous. It's sold in, there must be thousands of
milk thistle.
Of labels.
Everybody's heard of milk thistle.
Yeah, milk thistle, Silybum marianum. It comes from pretty much a European plant, but it came here and it's being cultivated all over the place. We cultivate some of that, but there are a lot of, I've always looked at herbs that are quite useful. There's a little herb called Culver's root, used to be.
Culver's root?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if we're the only company producing it, but it was very important in naturopathic medicine, and then it was sort of forgotten. So I love herbs that are important but have kind of been forgotten.
So what does it do?
Culver's root helps the liver drain, and especially the gallbladder. So if people have a lot of liver and gallbladder congestion, if it gets bad enough, they eventually get gallstones, and then they have to get their gallbladder cut out. If you take care of it properly in early stages, that would not need to happen. So, yeah.
So is this like the thistle, for instance? Is anybody else making the thistle?
Oh, I'm pretty sure they must be. I haven't kept track of that. But blessed thistle is another good herb. We produce a plant. We were the first company from the herbal company to take the wonderful teachings of an herbalist by the name of Matthew Wood that discovered that teasel, the root of a plant called teasel, which makes dried flowers that are beautiful. They're used in flower arrangements. But the root of that plant is very medicinal and helps offset the damage from Lyme disease. It's a huge...
It helps for Lyme's disease?
Offset the damage, yeah. It is tremendously valuable for that. We never represent it as a cure. It's simply something that's extremely helpful. And to get rid of Lyme disease requires a lot of strategy and intelligence.
All righty. So it sounds like you have this part of your life that is farming, and you have...
Well, it was kind of quiescent. You know, I mean, we established that. I have farm people that manage that, and I was sort of floating along in life. Got married 3 years ago, so life has been fun and different since that time. I was married previously to a wonderful lady that we just parted our ways, but we're still friends. And then I was quite a long time, 10 or 12 years, just living out there alone in that.
Out on your farm.
Mm-hmm.
Were you coming into Nashville doing your chiropractic work?
Yeah, seeing patients 3 days a week and then spending 4 days a week out on the farm. And there's a great deal of solitude, and that place is like almost like a time capsule. You go into it, and it's got hills on all sides, and it's magnificent, really. It's just such an honor to have a still place to hear the voice of whatever. God, creation, whatever you want to talk about. There's stillness there. There's no noise. Very rarely, I don't listen to the radio actually out there.
Okay.
Very rarely. I will look at video or specific TV. I don't turn on a TV, but I have a TV. And the sound, I have a 1/4 acre pond that's like a swimming pool, really, and I swim in it for several months during summer. But the number of frogs in there, and about 5 different varieties of tree frogs, create a symphony that I've just never heard anything like it. The only place I've heard something like that is in areas of the Amazon basin. And I think this is even better. It's just an absolute orchestra. You can lie on a raft in the middle of that pond, and the sound is so loud that your whole body vibrates.
Wow.
From that, there's a kind of a harmonic, it's like a waveform. All the frogs have a different
vibration.
They all have a different vibration, and they come in a synchronous thing, and it becomes like I guess it's a mantra of a sort. It's quite amazing. So that's a place that gives a lot of inspiration, and during that time I got a lot of guidance to what to do around the world and where to go. Australia, Bali.
And that was going searching for a particular flower? And the one thing I didn't quite understand is you find an amazing flower, and somehow, how do you get the essence from the flower that will heal, and you put it in a bottle?
It's a very common... See, when I studied the work of Dr. Edward Bach, who brought flower essences...
Bach flowers.
To the Western world, and most people have heard of that. It's a brand that's been out there for over 80 years, or 80 years about. So it's had a lot of time to build that brand awareness, and Dr. Bach was an amazing person. And I used to ask, for years, how did that guy figure out? And then finally I experienced it in my own life with that revelation that I talked about in the book, where I just had an awareness of something that changed my life at the turn of the millennium.
Which is?
Oh, well, I got a vision of how to extract a flower by a particular technology while it's living without cutting it.
Without cutting it.
And that's huge. So the central part of that book is the quantum physics of why that's important. When you don't cut a flower and you extract the healing frequencies out of it, what's the difference from the traditional flower essence where it's cut?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the difference of this unique patented technology versus the other 4 or 5 ways you can make an essence from a flower without cutting it? Because I'm not the first person that thought of that. Actually, I never thought of it. I just was given this vision, but it turns out that probably in the 1980s, people started trying to figure out how to make essences from flowers without cutting them.
Okay.
You can drop water over the edge of the flower and try and collect the water underneath.
Right.
You can kind of meditate with the flower and have the energy go into the thing without cutting it. So there's different ways of extracting a flower.
Okay. Or this is something that called clear that has quantum energy drops, and this has flower essence in
Yeah,
it?
and there's a pretty interesting story about that. All right, so if you look at the traditional medicine healing in Tibet, and you go into some of the plateau areas there, you will see some of the monks practicing a very interesting ceremony where they will take either sacred water, or probably, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if it was water that had flower energy put into it. And the person receiving that healing, they will, like that, spray the water out of their mouth. Because, you know, they didn't have spray bottles up there. So they would just spray this stuff around a person. And I saw those documentaries 30 years ago. I remember seeing these monks up in Tibet spraying people.
Looks like they're spitting on them, but they're
kind of
just
like
spraying.
they're spraying. It's a fine spray. So lo and behold, I get down to Peru and I go into some very remote areas in the Andes, and I see a group of shamans had lined up a bunch of native people on a sacred lake, and the last thing they do is they take a bottle of something that they call aguardiente, which is alcohol with water and drinking alcohol or stuff that they make, and there's a whole bunch of flowers in there. And they take that and they spray that just like the Tibetans, and it's half a world away.
Wow.
And it's very interesting to see that. And that, when I was training with the shaman there, he said that's the most powerful thing that we do, is spray them with that. So they shared with me what some of those flowers were. And then I found others that they didn't use that I found were very valuable, and I brought those back, and there are about 16 of those flowers in there. We don't ever use that many flowers normally, but this stuff is a magical substance that lifts negative energy, heavy energy.
And it's kind of amazing that different parts of the world are doing the same thing.
Yeah, that was very interesting to see.
Yeah. And you kind of like shuttled through, well, when I was in Peru, and then I was here, and I was with the shamans. I guess you have to read the book to know more about that, but it seems that you kind of drifted in different parts, kind of gathering that information, bringing it back to Tennessee, and then...
Yeah, actually, you know, funny, it wasn't much drifting. It was like pretty driven. And the few years before I started the hemp project, it was pretty relaxed. The hemp project is the most intense one I've ever seen.
And so we know about the uncut flowers, which is taking the essences and using for healing. And then the next project is the hemp. And then we just have a couple minutes kind of explain that. And then in the second show, we're going to learn a whole lot more about it. But
well, again, serendipity. My life is run by serendipity, chance, fate, whatever you want to call it. I don't.
The law of attraction.
I really. It's really an intentional law of attraction. It's very, and in fact, a great deal of this book talks about how we can remove obstacles so that we manifest stuff much more clearly. And I'm working on some visions now that I intend to see happen. We'll see if they do. But it's not wandering, it's very clear. So what ended up happening is one of my good friends happened to be in the Hemp Industries Association in Tennessee.
The Hemp
Industries Association.
Okay.
It's national, but there's an organization here. I treated his wife, and I knew him very well, and he started talking about what he was doing in this association and how amazingly therapeutic hemp is. And you know, my college years in the late 60s, 1969, graduated in 74 from UCLA. That was the heyday for drug use. I just never used it. I didn't have any interest. But I was fascinated to see how profoundly attached and connected to that plant I am, but not for psychoactive purposes, for the medicine in it.
In hemp.
It is profound. And it's because it has 3 groups, and we'll talk more about that, the amazing chemistry of the plant and how it enables such a great deal of healing.
We'll talk more about that in the second show, but you do have a website, and could you tell everybody your 2 websites?
Yes,
and we'll put that on
the
there
flower.
too.
Actually, there are 3 websites, and in the order that they happen in my life. Forest Center Herbs, 3 words, forestcenterherbs.com.
Forest Center Herbs.
Some very wonderful fresh plant, beautifully active fresh plant herbal extracts. Then the uncut flower essences, which is Flor Alive, like a flower alive, floralive.com. And the last one is Heaven Sent Hemp.
HeavenSentHemp.com.
Believe me, it's a very interesting story how that came about, because there is so much speculation in the hemp industry that virtually every name was bought by speculators with the knowledge that they'd be able to sell the name later for a very high price. So there's almost no names left. So we started thinking, what can we
name
then all of a
this?
sudden that emerged, Heaven Sent Hemp.
And nobody had it?
No, I didn't have that, so we got it.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
Wow. So your focus now is your hemp. You're growing it in this wonderful place outside of Nashville. And also you are seeing patients on a one-to-one basis.
Yes, I still do. I don't know how anyone could develop products without having patients. And if you look at the history of homeopathy, the history of all natural medical systems, it always came from physicians who were treating people who figured out if the stuff worked or not clinically.
Right.
It was just empirical, common sense way of doing things, double-blind studies, Actually, in the second interview, we want to talk about what 2 physicians said about the status of modern science. It's pretty interesting.
Yes. Well, I really appreciate you being here and explaining. It's a very exciting, your life has been very exciting, going into all these driven places on the earth and learning how you can help heal people, that we're all looking for something to heal various things. And he's used me as a guinea pig, so stay tuned for the second show. And I feel that we have a lot of information that will be learned actually if you go on the website. And also in the second show we'll kind of show some of the products that he is actually making that people can use to heal their body and spirit. And I think that it will be very helpful to a lot of people, a lot of our viewers.
I think people will enjoy that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure to be here.
Transitions, body, mind, spirit.
All right.